Have you ever felt anxious or irritable and immediately started looking for a cause, such as blaming someone or something, only to find out later your conclusion wasn't accurate? Do you sometimes believe your emotions must reflect reality, even when there's little evidence to support that feeling? Welcome back to Quieting Anxiety. I'm Dr. Monica Frank with Excel at Life. In today's episode, we're exploring the thinking pattern known as emotional reasoning, a common cognitive style that can quietly fuel anxiety without you even realizing it. Emotional reasoning is the tendency to treat feelings as facts. And while emotions are essential to our experience, they can also lead us astray if we don't pause to interpret them. Let's take a moment now to ground yourself before we explore this further. Find a comfortable position where your body feels supported. Take a deep breath in and exhale slowly. As you continue breathing, gently bring your awareness to the sensations in your body. Notice any tension or restlessness without trying to change it, just acknowledge it. Now bring your attention to your emotional state. Ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? Try to name the emotion without judgment. Then ask yourself, do I know why I feel this way? Pause and gently remind yourself, this feeling is real, but it may not reflect the whole truth. This practice is the foundation of mindful emotional awareness. It helps you step back from your emotions without denying them. It helps you notice rather than believe your first thought. And it's a crucial step toward changing how anxiety affects your day. With that, let's explore how emotional reasoning works and how we can begin to shift the way we interpret and respond to our feelings. Let me tell you about Ethan. Ethan often wakes up with a sense of unease in his chest, tight, heavy, like something is wrong. Before he even gets out of bed, he starts scanning his mind for a reason, which usually is related to some failure on his part. Did I forget something at work? Is my boss upset with me? As he gets ready for the day, his thoughts intensify. Maybe I missed an important email. Maybe someone's mad at me. By the time he arrives at work, he's anxious and withdrawn, interpreting every neutral comment or glance as confirmation that something is wrong, all because he felt anxious. This is a classic example of emotional reasoning, the belief that if you feel something, it must be true. I feel anxious, therefore something must be wrong. Or, I feel guilty, so I must have done something bad. This is what emotional reasoning does. It bypasses logic and goes straight from emotion to conclusion. Let's define it more clearly. Emotional reasoning is when we use how we feel to determine what is true. But emotions aren't always accurate reflections of reality. Emotions are important. They provide information, help us release tension, and allow us to communicate. But they aren't facts. Sometimes emotions arise from our physical state, like fatigue or hunger. Sometimes they're shaped by past experiences or unresolved trauma. Sometimes they arise simply because our brains are wired to detect danger, even when none exists. And sometimes they're shaped by how we view ourselves or the world overall. Emotional reasoning also often goes hand in hand with approval seeking. When we feel anxious or insecure in a situation, we may interpret that discomfort as proof that others are judging us or that we've done something wrong. For instance, you might feel nervous during a conversation and conclude, they must think I'm boring, simply because of your anxious feeling. This kind of reasoning doesn't consider the actual evidence. It relies on your internal emotional state to define external reality. And for someone who seeks approval, these emotions are constantly filtered through the fear of not being accepted or liked. This style of thinking can also lead to overgeneralization. A single moment of discomfort or criticism can become a sweeping conclusion about your worth or your future. If I felt awkward in that conversation, I must always be awkward. Or, if I didn't get that invitation, no one wants to include me. These patterns reinforce anxiety by turning momentary feelings into distorted beliefs. By learning to separate feelings from facts, you begin to break the cycle of emotional reasoning, and that opens the door to more balanced, reality-based thinking. Emotional reasoning can create self-fulfilling prophecies. Like Ethan, if you interpret your anxiety as proof something bad is happening, you may behave in ways that create conflict or withdrawal, further confirming your fears. But if you pause and say, I feel anxious right now, but that doesn't mean something is wrong, you create space to explore other possibilities. Let me share a common example for those with panic disorder of emotional reasoning creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. Someone might notice a wave of anxiety and immediately think, I'm going to have a panic attack. That belief alone, interpreting a normal, anxious sensation as a sign of impending catastrophe, can actually trigger the panic attack. The fear creates the anxiety cycle, which we talked about in an earlier podcast. Feeling anxious leads to catastrophic thoughts, which increase physical symptoms, which then confirm the belief that something is terribly wrong. But when individuals learn to recognize that the initial sensation of anxiety doesn't have to mean danger, and they stop automatically believing the thought, I'm going to panic, the cycle begins to break. Over time, this shift in interpretation often leads to a dramatic reduction in the frequency and intensity of panic attacks. Emotional reasoning is also particularly strong for many of those with obsessive compulsive disorder. The tendency is to ignore evidence and rely on emotions. I feel this isn't clean enough, or I feel I didn't check enough. All this doesn't mean emotions don't matter. In fact, as I mentioned earlier, they serve three very important functions: information, release, and communication. Emotions can alert you to subtle cues in your environment that your logical mind hasn't yet noticed. Emotions also help you process experiences and let go of tension. Crying, laughing, even venting, all can be healthy expressions of emotion. And emotions help with communication by helping you relate to others. Much of your nonverbal communication, your tone, posture, and facial expressions, conveys emotion. But emotions work best when balanced with logic. Let's consider logic's role. Logic gathers evidence. It allows you to pause and assess. Is this feeling based on something real and current? In addition, logic evaluates intensity. Maybe the emotion is valid, but is the reaction proportional? Interestingly, a research study many years ago demonstrated how people interpret their emotions based on cues from their environment, unless they have a clearer explanation. In this study, participants were given an injection of adrenaline to create physical agitation. Some were told to expect symptoms like jitteriness. Others were not told anything. Then each person was placed in a room with another participant who was actually an actor. This participant actor began expressing frustration and anger about being kept waiting. The results? Those who weren't told about the injection felt angry and assumed it was due to the situation. Those who knew the cause didn't report anger. Why? Because they had an explanation. The environment influenced how they made sense of their feelings. This study highlights how we rely on context to explain feelings, and why we need to check that context. That's why it's so important to develop awareness of your internal state, your environment, and your patterns of thinking. This doesn't mean ignoring emotions or pretending not to feel them. It means learning to respond with awareness rather than reacting automatically. So, how can you manage emotional reasoning? First, start by noticing when you're reacting to an emotion. Do you tend to make assumptions based on how you feel? Do you treat emotions like facts? Next, bring curiosity to the feeling. Ask yourself, what evidence supports this emotion? What evidence doesn't? For example, if you feel nervous and start to believe your friends are mad at you, pause. Ask yourself, have they actually done or said anything to indicate that? Or am I assuming based on how I feel? Sometimes it helps to consider other possible causes for the emotion. Did you get enough sleep? Are you hungry? Has something else in your life been stressful that might be affecting your mood? Could this emotion be related to something from the past? Then you can reflect on whether the emotion fits the situation. Even if there is a valid reason to feel something, is your reaction proportionate? Or are you having an intense response to something relatively small? Finally, gently challenge the belief behind the emotion. If you've examined the situation and found no clear evidence, remind yourself, just because I feel this way doesn't mean it's true. Over time, this kind of gentle questioning can help you shift out of emotional reasoning and into more balanced thinking. As you continue to practice this, emotional reasoning loses its grip, and your confidence in your ability to interpret your experiences grows stronger. I need to give you a caveat to this. Many times people think they have reasoned through an emotion only to convince themselves of the emotion's accuracy. Sometimes it can be helpful to get another unbiased opinion. For today's reflection, I encourage you to pause when you feel anxious, upset, or uncertain. Ask yourself, what else could this be? Could it be fatigue, past experiences, physical discomfort, or even just habit? Then remind yourself, emotions are valid, but they aren't always accurate. For your task this week, listen to Understanding Mindfulness Step 3, Mindfulness and Unpleasant Emotions. Even if you have listened to this audio before, it can be helpful to review it, especially if you have trouble with emotional reasoning. And if you need additional help with emotions, the audio Building Blocks Emotion training can be helpful. It is meant to be listened to repeatedly until you can create the emotional states yourself. Next time, we'll explore another thinking style that can influence anxiety. And as always, if you've missed earlier episodes, feel free to go back and catch up. Each one builds on the last to support your journey. Let's end with a mindfulness practice to help gently shift the emotional patterns that anxiety creates. Imagine this. Every time you feel anxiety in your body, maybe a flutter in your chest or a tightening in your stomach, your brain immediately travels down a well-worn path of fear and urgency. You may think something's wrong or I can't handle this. Over time, this path becomes automatic. The moment anxiety arises, your mind leaps to worst-case scenarios and distressing conclusions. This is emotional reasoning in action, believing something must be wrong because it feels wrong. But now, instead of avoiding those sensations or rushing to interpret them, what if you paused? What if, even for a few breaths, you allowed yourself to feel the anxiety without judgment, to simply notice it as a sensation, tightness, warmth, pressure, without attaching a catastrophic meaning? Each time you do this, you're creating a new path in the brain, one of tolerance, curiosity, and eventually calm. Over time, this new path competes with the old one. You still feel anxiety, but you also have the memory of handling it, breathing through it, and letting it pass. With each mindful encounter, you're teaching your mind and body that anxiety doesn't always mean danger or something bad. And that's how emotional reasoning begins to lose its grip, not by force, but by experience. Let's take a moment now to breathe. Notice how your body feels. Notice any emotions that are present. And allow yourself to be here with them, just as they are, not needing to fix, judge, or escape, just allowing. As you return to your day, carry with you this reminder. You can feel without believing. You can observe without reacting. You can choose a different path. Until next time, keep practicing, keep breathing, and keep moving forward.